The soundstage went completely silent when a rising young actor said the words that would end his career in less than 60 seconds. It was March 7, 1994, on the set of the Bridges of Madison County, and what started as a joke about Clint Eastwood's famous quiet demeanor turned into the most brutal public humiliation in Hollywood history. The cameras weren't rolling, but 87 witnesses stood frozen as Clint Eastwood did something that veterans who'd worked with him for 30 years had never seen before. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't throw a punch. What he did was so psychologically devastating that the actor who mocked him never worked on a major film again. The actor's name was Derek Ashford, a 28-year-old who just landed his first significant role after years of struggling in Los Angeles. He had 3 lines in the film, barely 2 minutes of screen time, but he thought he was untouchable because his uncle was a studio executive at Warner Brothers. Derek had spent the previous 5 years auditioning for everything, landing nothing but background work and single-episode television appearances. 2 episodes of ER where he played a paramedic with no lines. 1 episode of NYPD Blue as a witness who said 4 words. His resume was thin, his talent was average, and his connections were the only reason he was standing on that set. He knew it. Everyone knew it. But Derek had convinced himself that being related to power was the same as earning it. What Clint said in the next 4 minutes would become legendary whispered advice given to every cocky young actor in Hollywood for the next 3 decades. Directors would tell the story during first table reads. Acting coaches would use it as a cautionary tale about the difference between confidence and arrogance. Studio executives would remind entitled young stars what happens when you mistake silence for weakness. But before we get to that devastating moment, you need to understand what led a man famous for his quiet professionalism to finally unleash the most cutting takedown anyone had ever witnessed. You need to understand the specific sequence of events that pushed Clint Eastwood past his legendary patience, and into a moment of verbal destruction so precise that grown men on that set would later describe it as watching a master class in controlled fury. If this story already has you hooked, do me 2 favors right now. First, hit that subscribe button for Emma's Theater because we bring you these powerful true stories of Hollywood legends that nobody else will tell you. And second, drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever witnessed someone's arrogance destroy them in real time? Share your story. I read every single comment, and your experience might be featured in our next video. Now let's get back to what happened on that set. March 7, 1994, 6:47 in the morning. The Warner Brothers Ranch in Burbank, California was already buzzing with activity as crew members prepared for another day of filming. The air was crisp and cool, that perfect early spring morning where the California sun hadn't yet burned off the marine layer. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from the craft services tent, mixing with the scent of dew on the grass and the faint chemical smell of film equipment being prepped. This was a Clint Eastwood set, which meant precision, efficiency, and an almost military level of organization. Call time was 7 o'clock sharp, but Clint had arrived at 6:45 as he always did. 30 minutes early was on time in Clint's world. And time was late. And late was unforgivable. He walked onto the set wearing simple clothing, jeans and a work shirt, carrying a thermos of coffee he'd made himself that morning. At 63 years old, Clint Eastwood moved with the same quiet confidence that had defined his entire career. He didn't announce his arrival. He didn't need to. The crew felt the shift in energy the moment he appeared. Conversations became quieter. Movements became more purposeful. This wasn't fear. It was respect. Clint treated every person on his crew with dignity, from the director of photography to the production assistants fetching coffee. He knew their names. He asked about their families. And in return, they gave him their absolute best work because they knew he would never waste their time with ego or incompetence. Meryl Streep was already in the makeup trailer, having arrived at 6:30. She and Clint had developed a mutual respect bordering on reverence during pre-production. Both were consummate professionals who understood that great filmmaking required discipline, preparation, and leaving your ego at the door. The film they were making, The Bridges of Madison County, was a quiet love story that demanded subtlety and emotional restraint. Every word mattered. Every glance carried weight. This was not a project for actors who needed to fill silence with noise. The crew had learned within the first week that Clint's sets operated on a different frequency than most Hollywood productions. There was no chaos, no screaming, no dramatic tantrums from directors or stars demanding another take because they didn't like their hair. Clint rarely did more than 3 takes of any scene. He trusted his actors. He trusted his crew. And most importantly, he had done his homework in pre-production so thoroughly that everyone knew exactly what they were supposed to be doing before the cameras ever rolled. The atmosphere was calm, focused, almost meditative. Veterans in the industry fought to work on Clint Eastwood films because they knew they'd be treated like professionals and go home at a reasonable hour instead of suffering through 18-hour days feeding some director's insecurity. Derek Ashford arrived at 7:02 in the morning, 2 minutes late. It was his first day on set despite being in the production for 3 days of rehearsals that he'd missed due to what he called prior commitments. The truth was he'd been at clubs in West Hollywood, telling anyone who would listen that he'd landed a role in a Clint Eastwood film. He walked onto the set wearing expensive sunglasses and carrying a leather-bound script that looked brand new, clearly more prop than tool. A production assistant directed him toward the holding area where the supporting actors waited between scenes. Derek immediately started talking, his voice carrying across the quiet soundstage like a car alarm in a library. He told everyone within earshot about how his uncle Thomas Ashford, a senior vice president at Warner Brothers, had personally called Clint's production office to get him this role. He described it as if he was doing the production a favor by appearing in the film. The other actors in the holding area exchanged uncomfortable glances. These were working professionals, character actors who'd spent decades earning their place in the industry through talent and persistence. They recognized Derek's type immediately. The nephew. The connected kid who confused access with ability. They'd seen dozens like him cycle through Hollywood, burning bright with unearned confidence before disappearing into obscurity. A veteran script supervisor named Margaret Chan was standing near enough to hear Derek's boasting. She'd worked with Clint on 6 previous films and understood the culture he cultivated on set. She approached Derek quietly during a break and offered him what she thought was helpful advice. "This is a different kind of set," she said gently. "Clint values professionalism and quiet focus. Just a heads up." Derek smiled at her with the kind of condescension that only the truly ignorant can muster. "Thanks, but I think I know how to handle myself on a film set," he replied. "Besides, what's Clint gonna do? Fire my uncle's nephew?" Margaret walked away shaking her head, already knowing how this story would end. The morning proceeded with rehearsals and blocking for the day's scenes. Clint worked with Merrill and the principal cast, moving through the material with efficient precision. He spoke sparingly, offering direction in short, clear sentences. "Let's try it with a longer pause before that line. Move 2 steps closer on that mark. That was perfect, let's get it on camera." His economy of language wasn't coldness. It was clarity. He knew exactly what he wanted and communicated it without wasting anyone's time. The crew appreciated it. The actors trusted it. But Derek, watching from the sidelines, interpreted Clint's silence as something else entirely. At 9:30 in the morning, during a break between setups, Derek found himself surrounded by a small group of extras and minor actors. He was in the middle of telling an elaborate story about his method acting classes in New York when Clint walked past, silently reviewing notes in his script. Derek's voice rose slightly, making sure his next comment would carry. "Look at that, the strong silent type," he said with exaggerated reverence. "Does he ever actually talk, or did he forget his lines again?" Few people offered nervous laughs. Some crew members within earshot froze, their hands stopping mid-task. Margaret Chen closed her eyes and silently prayed this kid would stop talking. But Derek, emboldened by the attention and the scattered laughter, continued. "I heard Clint Eastwood literally only speaks 10 words a day on set," he announced loudly. "Must be easy to direct when you just point and grunt like a caveman." He did an exaggerated impression, squinting his eyes and making a low grunting sound. More uncomfortable laughter from the group, though several people had stopped laughing and started looking genuinely worried. One of the gaffers, a man named Lou Mendez who'd worked in Hollywood for 40 years, muttered under his breath, "This kid has no idea what he just started." Clint had stopped walking about 15 feet away. His back was turned to Derek's group, but his shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. For a moment, everyone thought he might turn around. Instead, he continued walking toward his director's chair, his face showing nothing. Derek thought he'd gotten away with it. 20 minutes passed. The crew returned to work, setting up lights and adjusting camera positions for the next scene. Derek remained in the holding area, still surrounded by his small audience, still running his mouth like a man who didn't understand he was standing on a landmine. He'd moved on from mocking Clint's silence to critiquing what he called old-school directing techniques that didn't understand modern performance theory. The people around him were no longer laughing. Some had quietly walked away. Others stayed out of morbid curiosity, the same way people slow down to look at car accidents on the freeway. Then Derek made his fatal mistake. "You know what's funny?" he said, his voice carrying across the soundstage again. "I have 3 lines in this movie, and I guarantee I've said more words today than Clint has said in 3 months. He paused for effect, grinning. "The man's a legend because he perfected saying nothing. Even I could do that. How hard is it to look tough when you're not saying anything? Watch." Derek stood up and did an elaborate impersonation of Clint's walk. His posture, his squint. He lowered his voice to a gravelly whisper. "Go ahead, make my day." The impression was exaggerated, mocking, designed to get laughs at Clint's expense. A couple of people chuckled nervously, but most of the group had gone completely silent. Meryl Streep, who'd been reviewing her script across the soundstage, looked up sharply. Her face registered immediate horror. She knew what was about to happen even before it started. A first assistant director standing near the camera turned pale and began walking quickly toward Clint's chair, but he was too late. Clint's assistant director, a woman named Patricia who'd worked with him for 15 years, had already approached him and whispered something in his ear. Clint's jaw tightened. He set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. Then he stood up slowly, the movement so controlled it seemed to happen in slow motion. What happens in the next few minutes will leave you speechless. But before we get there, if you're feeling this story, subscribe to Emma's Theater right now so you never miss these incredible true Hollywood stories. And here's my question for you. Have you ever witnessed someone's arrogance destroy them in real time? Drop your answer in the comments below. Now let's see what Clint Eastwood did that ended Derek's career. The entire crew sensed the shift immediately. Conversations died mid-sentence. People stopped moving. Tools were set down. Everyone turned to watch as Clint Eastwood walked across the soundstage directly toward Derek's group. His face showed nothing. No anger. No emotion. Just absolute focus. Derek was still laughing, still basking in the attention from his impersonation, completely unaware of what was approaching from behind him. One of the extras, a woman who'd done background work for 20 years, whispered urgently, "Derek, turn around." He waved her off, starting another joke. "Derek," she hissed again. "Turn around right now." Derek finally turned. His smile still plastered across his face. The smile died the instant he saw Clint Eastwood standing 3 feet away. The blood drained from Derek's face so quickly he looked like he might faint. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Clint stood there in complete silence for 5 seconds that felt like 5 hours. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper, forcing everyone to lean in to hear. "You think silence is weakness." It wasn't a question. It was a statement delivered with surgical precision. Derek stammered, "Mr. Eastwood, I was just..." Clint held up one finger. "I'm talking." Derek's mouth snapped shut. The soundstage was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming through the vents. Clint continued, his voice still quiet, still controlled, but carrying a weight that made grown men uncomfortable. "You have 3 lines in this movie. 3. Do you know how I got those 3 lines written? I spent 6 hours with a screenwriter making sure every single word in this script earned its place. Your 3 lines took me 43 minutes to perfect. He took one step closer to Derek. You've been on this set for 2 hours and 17 minutes. In that time you've been late, you've been loud, and you've been disrespectful. Do you know how many words I've spoken today? 42. Do you know why? Because I only speak when I have something worth saying. Derek tried to respond, his voice cracking. I didn't mean. Clint cut him off instantly. You think acting is about talking. You think directing is about giving speeches. You think success is about making sure everyone knows you're in the room. Let me teach you something your uncle clearly never did. The circle of people around them had tightened without anyone realizing it. Crew members from across the soundstage had gravitated toward the confrontation like metal to a magnet. Meryl Streep stood 30 feet away, watching with an expression that mixed horror and fascination. She'd seen Clint handle difficult actors before, but never like this. Never with this level of controlled devastation. Lou Mendez, the veteran gaffer, had tears forming in his eyes, though whether from second-hand embarrassment for Derek or respect for what Clint was doing, nobody could tell. Clint's voice remained quiet, forcing everyone to strain to hear every word. I've made 47 films. I've won 4 Academy Awards. I've directed some of the greatest actors who ever lived. And do you know what every single one of them learned on my set? He paused, letting the question hang in the air. Derek's face was crimson now, tears beginning to form at the corners of his eyes. His hands were shaking. Silence is power. Silence is control. Silence means you're listening instead of performing. Silence means you're learning instead of impressing. Silence means you respect the people around you enough to let them work. Clint gestured around the soundstage at the crew, at the cameras, at the lights, at the dozens of professionals who'd stopped everything to witness this moment. You came onto my set, surrounded by people who've been doing this longer than you've been alive. And you decided the smart move was to mock me for being quiet. Let me tell you what that tells me about you. The weight of those words landed like a physical blow. Derek's shoulders slumped. He looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. But Clint wasn't finished. It tells me you're insecure. It tells me you know you don't belong here, so you're trying to make yourself feel bigger by making me smaller. It tells me your uncle made a phone call, not because you're talented but because you're family. And it tells me that in 10 years, nobody will remember your name. Margaret Chen, the script supervisor who'd tried to warn Derek earlier, had her hand over her mouth. Several crew members were openly crying now. This wasn't just a reprimand. This was a public dissection of everything wrong with the kind of entitled mediocrity that had infected Hollywood for generations. Clint's voice softened slightly, but somehow that made it worse. You have 3 lines, Derek. I'm going to let you say them because I'm professional and I finish what I start. But after today, you're going to learn the most important lesson of your career. He let that statement breathe for a moment. Derek was fully crying now, tears streaming down his face, his body trembling. You want to know why I'm silent? Because I don't need to convince anyone I deserve to be here. My work speaks. Your mockery. That just proved you have nothing else to say. Then came the final blow, delivered with such quiet finality that people who were there would quote it verbatim for decades. Now get out of my sight. Go to your trailer. Learn your 3 lines. And when I call you back, you're going to deliver them in one take. Because I'm not wasting another second of my crew's time on someone who doesn't respect theirs. Clint turned and walked back to his director's chair. Not another word. Not another glance. Just complete dismissal. Derek stood frozen for almost 10 seconds, tears streaming down his face, humiliated in front of 87 witnesses. Then he stumbled toward his trailer like a man who'd just been hit by a car. If you're feeling the weight of what just happened, you need to subscribe to Emma's Theater right now because we're bringing you more stories like this that show you the real Hollywood. And I want to know, have you ever witnessed someone's arrogance destroy them in real time? Share your experience in the comments. What happened next will show you just how far Derek's career fell. The soundstage remained silent for a full minute after Derek disappeared. Nobody knew what to say. Nobody knew how to process what they'd just witnessed. Finally, Meryl Streep walked over to Clint's chair. She didn't say anything at first, just stood beside him. Then she spoke quietly, just loud enough for him to hear. That was necessary. Clint looked up at her, and for the first time that morning, his face showed something other than controlled fury. He looked tired. Was it too much? He asked. Meryl shook her head firmly. No. He needed to hear it. We all needed to hear it. Production resumed 45 minutes later. The crew worked with renewed focus, as if Clint's verbal takedown had reminded everyone why they were there and what standards they were supposed to uphold. In his trailer, Derek sat on a cheap couch with his head in his hands, his phone pressed to his ear. He was calling his uncle, and the conversation was not going well. What did you do? Thomas Ashford's voice crackled through the phone, already angry because he'd received 3 calls from Warner Brothers executives in the last 20 minutes. Derek explained what happened, his voice breaking multiple times. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then his uncle's response, cold and final. You mocked Clint Eastwood on his set. Jesus Christ, Derek. I can't protect you from this. At 2:47 in the afternoon, Derek was called back to set. He walked out of his trailer looking like a man heading to his own execution. His eyes were red and swollen. His hands shook as he held his script. The crew didn't acknowledge him. They weren't being cruel. They simply had work to do. Clint sat in his director's chair, reviewing notes. He didn't look up when Derek took his position on set. Action, Clint said quietly. Derek delivered all 3 of his lines perfectly. His voice steady despite everything. One take. No mistakes. Cut, Clint said. Moving on. Derek was dismissed for the day. He'd been on camera for less than 90 seconds. By 6 o'clock that evening, every major studio in Hollywood had heard the story. Phone calls bounced between executives, agents, and producers. Did you hear what happened on Bridges? The Eastwood thing. Yeah, brutal. Apparently the kid was Tom Ashford's nephew. Not anymore, he's not. Derek's agent received 4 calls before sunset, all asking the same question. What the hell happened? By the end of the week, that agent had dropped him. Derek tried to find new representation. Nobody would take his calls. This story gets even more powerful, but first, make sure you're subscribed to Emma's Theater because stories like this, real Hollywood lessons that changed lives, are what we do here. And tell me in the comments, have you ever witnessed someone's arrogance destroy them in real time? Your story matters. Now let's see what happened to Derek in the years that followed. Derek Ashford's career didn't just stall after that day. It evaporated like water on hot asphalt. The 3 remaining auditions he had scheduled were cancelled. Casting directors who'd shown interest in meeting him suddenly had full schedules. His name became something people whispered about in waiting rooms and industry events. You hear about the kid who mocked Clint Eastwood. The story spread through Hollywood like wildfire, growing slightly more elaborate with each retelling, but the core truth remained unchanged. A cocky young actor with connections had mistaken silence for weakness and paid the ultimate professional price. In 1995, Derek managed to book 2 commercial auditions. He didn't get either job. In 1996, he worked as an extra on 3 different productions, standing in the background of scenes, no lines, no credit. In 1997, he tried using a different name, Derek Richards, hoping to escape the shadow of his reputation. Someone recognized him on set and the story came out again. By 1998, he'd left Los Angeles entirely and moved to Chicago, where his uncle helped him get a job in real estate development. Thomas Ashford never spoke to his nephew about Hollywood again. That chapter was closed, sealed, and buried. But the legend of what happened on that soundstage only grew. Directors began telling the story during first table reads with young casts, using it as a cautionary tale about respect and humility. Acting coaches incorporated it into their curriculum, teaching students the difference between confidence and arrogance. Studio executives reminded entitled young stars what could happen when you confuse access with achievement. The story became a ghost story, a warning, a cultural touchstone that defined an entire generation's understanding of professional conduct. Clint Eastwood never publicly spoke about the incident. When journalists occasionally asked about conflicts or difficult actors on the set of the Bridges of Madison County, he would simply say, "I don't recall any problems. We had a professional crew and everyone did their job." His refusal to discuss it, his return to silence, somehow made the story even more powerful. He'd said what needed to be said in that moment, and he would never need to say it again. Derek Ashford, to his credit, eventually found a strange kind of redemption in his failure. In 2003, he wrote a letter to Clint Eastwood. A full apology, typed on simple paper, taking complete responsibility for his actions. "I was 28 years old, insecure and stupid," he wrote. "You taught me the most important lesson of my life, and even though it cost me my career, I'm grateful for it. I tell my story to young people now as a warning. Respect isn't optional. Humility isn't weakness. And silence from someone who's earned their place is worth more than all the noise from someone who hasn't." Whether Clint ever responded remains unknown. Derek later told a friend. He acknowledged it in his own way, but never elaborated. This story proves that respect and humility matter more than talent or connections. If this moved you, subscribe to Emma's Theater right now because we're bringing you more powerful true stories from Hollywood that teach real lessons. And one last time, I want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed someone's arrogance destroy them in real time? Drop your story in the comments below. Your experience could help someone else avoid the same mistake. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this lesson. Remember, silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the most powerful thing you can give. Today, Derek Ashford works in commercial real estate in Chicago. He's successful in his field, comfortable, and by all accounts a changed man. He occasionally participates in local theater productions, small community playhouses where the work is done for love rather than fame. When young actors ask him about his brief time in Hollywood, he tells them the story honestly, without embellishment, without excuses. "Let me tell you about the day I learned what humility means," he begins. And then he tells them about Clint Eastwood, about silence, about the difference between making noise and making meaning. Clint Eastwood is 93 years old now, still making films, still speaking only when he has something worth saying. His legacy is secure, built on decades of powerful performances and masterful directing, on respect earned through work rather than demanded through volume. The lesson he taught Derek Ashford that day in 1994 continues to echo through Hollywood, a reminder that arrogance is loud, confidence is quiet, and legends don't need to defend themselves because their work already did. Actor mocked Clint Eastwood's silence. Big mistake. The biggest of his life.